The eye test says Penn State should win this game, but what do the analytics say?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of the show, and help me welcome back Pro Football Focus's Max Chadwick. He is also the host of Pro Football Focus's College Football Show. So we're going to get the analytical side of Penn State versus USC and how these two teams have come together, meeting in the middle of the season. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Everyone, let us know your score predictions down in the comment section. And if you agree or disagree with what the analytics say, and Max, I've looked at this. The analytics are, I guess, in the scheme of things, with the way that these are lining up from the public's perception, it's that this is supposed to be all Penn State, or at least Penn State's supposed to win convincingly. And the analytics tell a bit of a different angle, that USC should absolutely make this a competitive game and maybe even win, should be the favorite in this game.
Yeah, I don't know about favorite. I would say it should be a fun game. I think, Penn State obviously going across 3 time zones to USC is going to be a storyline for sure. I mean, you saw it last week, especially the affected teams, right? Michigan lost to Washington when they traveled to Seattle. You saw USC lose to Minnesota when they traveled to Minneapolis. And then Miami traveled all the way across the country to Cal, and Miami needed a 25-point comeback to escape Cal with a victory, right? So that's probably a storyline to look at this one too. But I think Penn State's a better team for sure, and they should be the favorite in this one. But I would not be surprised at all if this is a competitive game, though.
USC, I think, I don't think they're not a top 25 team. 3 points against Michigan, a game that it's 7 points against Minnesota, but that was tied down to the wire, and then they ultimately lose. And listening to Lincoln Riley, if the ball bounces a couple of different ways, they're 5-0 and inside of the top 10, and this is a top 10 showdown between Penn State and USC. Do the numbers back up what Lincoln Riley says about that game? Were those games that close?
Yeah, they were. I mean, the Michigan game especially was a very, very close game, and obviously if they didn't let Kalel Mullings run for 70 yards with under 2 minutes to go, basically, they would have probably won that game because Michigan had no passing game at all, and they needed to drive all the way down the field and score a touchdown. And they let Kalel Mullings, break a couple tackles and get a 68-yard run, I think, off of them. So, yeah, I think that, and then the Minnesota game obviously came down to the wire as well. So, yeah, it makes sense. But obviously, at the same time, though, you got to finish games, right? You can't just say, "Oh, well, if this happened or if this happened, we would have been fine." Like, I don't care. Like, no one cares about that. Like, you got to actually win the games, Lincoln, right? So, I think, yeah, they're 3-2. They're still a really, really good team. I would agree with you. They're probably, in terms of how good they actually are, they probably are a top 25 team in college football. But I don't think they deserve to be in the top 25 right now because they already have 2 losses on the year. And I would not put any 2-loss team in the top 25 right now. So, yeah, I think they're still a very good team, which is still obviously going to be tough for Penn State this Saturday. But, yeah, they have to finish games, though, for sure.
Well, and I completely agree with you, Max. When you look at the AP top 25 specifically, USC being unranked is justified because the only other 2-loss team in there is Michigan at number 24, and Michigan beat USC. You can't rank USC in there if Michigan's going to be the only 2-loss team. Looking at the way that PFF has Penn State and USC ranked, Penn State's the 6th overall team. USC is 24th. Okay, so the analytics say this is a top 25 team. But the key for me here is the defense. USC has struggled against strong defensive teams. I think if Michigan played a little more complimentary football, their defense would get a lot more credit. I think from a talent standpoint, that's a top 5 defense. And then Minnesota is much better than advertised. I mean, that's a team that has 12 interceptions through the halfway mark of the season, Max. So USC being the 38th ranked defense, according to PFF, and Penn State's the 2nd ranked defense per PFF. I think, once again, you're getting a game where USC just doesn't match up to its competition very well.
Yeah, I think, you definitely look at that. The USC defense is a lot better than it was last year when it was one of the worst in America, honestly. But they still have their issues. They still have, their pass rush isn't all that great yet. Physicality is still sometimes a problem. Their tackling has improved, which is good. besides that one Caleb Mullings run. But the coverage unit has been a lot better. I think that's really the big thing for them. It's their secondary has gotten a lot better because they added a lot of really good players in the transfer portal. Guys like Kamari Ramsey, Achille Arnold, and guys like that have really helped out that secondary. So, yeah, D'Anton Lynn, who was one of the best defensive coordinators in the country last year at UCLA, turning around that UCLA defense from a horrible one into one of the 10 best in the country. He's an excellent coach, and he's done kind of the same thing at USC where they turned into a horrible one into actually a respectable one at USC. But they still have their issues, and I think their pass rush is still a little bit of an issue. And you got to get after Drew Allar, right? If you let him be in rhythm back there, he's going to kill you. He's been one of the best quarterbacks in rhythm this year. So, yeah, they have to do that. But, their defense has gotten a lot better, though. It's no longer one that you could easily walk over anymore.
I look at that battle in the trenches. Specifically on the outside, and even Zane Durant has been a PFF monster, and the eye test, he's passed the numbers test and the eye test. Abdul Carter is starting to finally play better football. I had continued to say on this show, do not sell out on Abdul Carter. Better days of football are ahead for him. He's changing to a new position, and now he's starting to have these monster games, and they were always there, but the monster games were basically kind of overshadowed by, okay, you're not putting up a lot of stats in the box score here, but the numbers still showed a little bit of a different story despite the first two games, which were pretty ugly for Abdul Carter. But then I look at the game, so he's going up against most likely Elijah Page. Elijah Page is a redshirt freshman, and it just hasn't been his season. I think he has a PFF grade under the 60s. Abdul Carter and then Denai Dennis Sutton on the other side, they should be able to have an incredible day against these Trojan tackles.
Yeah, they should, honestly. And you look at what they've done this year. I mean, Abdul Carter and Dennis Sutton are two really good edge defenders. Both of them are going to be drafted to the NFL this year. Abdul Carter might be a top 10 pick, honestly, at this rate. I mean, you mentioned it. He came on really slow to start the year. You got to remember he's changing positions, though, going from off-ball to edge. Last 2 weeks against Illinois and UCLA, he has a combined 23% pressure rate, which is really good. So he's finally starting to figure it out, it seems like. And then you mentioned it. I mean, USC's tackles have been really bad this year. They actually have the lowest graded tackles in the Power 4, lowest pass blocking grade in the Power 4 as well. Their offensive line as a unit has been really bad. They have the third worst overall grade, second worst pass blocking grade, fifth worst run blocking grade. Their offensive line is by far the weakness of this team right now. And you look at that, and you look at Penn State's defensive line with Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, and other guys on it. That's a big advantage for Penn State. And I think if Penn State's going to win this game, it's going to be because of that advantage, honestly. So I think Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton especially could tee off against those tackles because USC's interior is below average. It's not good, don't get me wrong, but it's below average because Jonah Monheim at center is still a really good player. But the tackles are not good. And if you have a guy like Abdul Carter, who's really starting to come alive the last couple of weeks against those tackles that have graded out that badly, he's going to have a good day probably, right? So that's the biggest advantage of the entire game, I think, is Penn State defensive line against USC's offensive line.
And I'm looking at it. I don't know how Miller Moss gets the football off at past 2-3 seconds here because he has a lot of different weapons. Now they are missing the best tight end that they could have available in Lake McCree, and I think he's really good, and that's a big deal. I think the USC offense has looked so much different since he's been out since that Michigan game. But Jacoby Lane, Zachariah Branch, maybe somebody like Makai Lemon, those receivers, USC can go 4 or 5 wide receivers. And I'm sitting here thinking, man, USC, that's going to be the toughest test that Penn State faces. But not if Miller Moss doesn't have any time to throw the football back there. And he could also dump it off to Woody Marks, too. Woody Marks, I think, is maybe arguably the best overall player. I know Miller Moss has graded out well on the offensive side of things. But, Max, that's when I look at this game, analytics and just the eye test in general, the teams that USC has lost to play really good defense. Minnesota, objectively, numbers or opinion, have a top 25 defense. Michigan, I think a top 10 just to be safe. or I'd argue a top 5 defense. Penn State is in that same conversation of a top 10 and a top 5 defense. But Max, what's different about those teams, and you know this very well, is that Penn State plays complementary football. So where Michigan is throwing for 32 yards, and they're saying the only thing we can do is run the football, and the same thing with Minnesota. They have a Marcus Major. They have a Darius Taylor, who I'm a huge fan of. But the quarterback play is, we need it to be efficient enough. 19 pass attempts against a USC defense where the secondary's better, but they still relied on the ground game, chewing the clock, and sound defense. Penn State plays complementary football where they can speed things up and put a bunch of points up, or they can go 10, 12, 15 play drives to keep the defense rested and really tire out a USC. And I think that's the difference here. The biggest difference between all of those matchups that USC has faced is right there, that Penn State can do things offensively that Minnesota and Michigan cannot.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You look at that, what Drew Allar has done this year, what the offensive line has done this year, what the receiving core has done this year, and really all of that, Andy Kotelnicki. Andy Kotelnicki is one of the U.S. assistant coaches in college football, because you look at the players they have there. I mean, it's really the same that they had last year. They're just playing better because they actually, have a really competent offensive coordinator leading them right now. So, yeah, I've been blown away by Andy Kotelnicki. All the stuff we heard about him at Kansas has carried over into the Big Ten. And, what I love about his offense is that at Kansas, he ran in a very efficient offense, one of the top 5 most efficient offenses in the country actually last year. But it was kind of like a Big 12 version of it. He's like Big Ten-ified it a little bit, coming into Penn State, which is really, really cool to see. So having offensive linemen come in motion, like just killing guys, I love everything about this offense right now. And you're seeing Drew Allar, who played very tense last year, start to be a lot more comfortable, right? And I think that's a big thing for him. And that, I was a big Drew Allar guy. I mean, this. I've come on the show before and say how I didn't think Drew Allar was a problem last year. I thought it was the receivers. I thought it was the offensive line being okay. And I thought the play calling was obviously not good at all, which is why they fired Mike Yurcich. And then now they fixed the play calling, and that just elevates everything else around them. And the receiving core has played a lot better too. So, I think everyone, besides even outside of Drew, is more comfortable in this offense now. And you're seeing it pay dividends for Penn State offensively. And now it's no longer, okay, hopefully our defense can hold them to 20 or fewer points, or else we're probably going to lose this game. No, now you're starting to see, hey, if our defense has an off day by some chance, we can still win this game, right? We still have an offense capable of winning this game. So that's a really good thing to have. And hopefully Nick Singleton's back this week from his injury, because I think he adds an explosive element that Kaytron Allen simply does not add to this offense, even though I like Kaytron Allen a lot for what he does. But you have all that. And I really think USC is going to have a lot of trouble defending this offense.
Coming up next, Max and I will share our picks for this game and talk a little bit more about the Penn State team as a whole. And then in the final segment, the lowdown on USC. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, and drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's how to use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly, pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use code LockedOnCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they're going to refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. It's that convenient. It's that simple. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's right, guaranteed. When you place your first $5 bet, that's all it takes is $5 to get $200 in bonus bets. That's over at FanDuel.com. And if you look over at FanDuel.com, Penn State versus USC. The lines have been available now, and we're getting into the home stretch of everything. Penn State is still a 4.5-point favorite, according to FanDuel, minus 200 on the money line, and the total is set at 50.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them now over at FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, now let's actually give an official score prediction. I did a couple of other preview episodes where I said that I think Penn State wins 34-27. I think USC can score. I don't think they can stop Penn State from scoring. So that total, that's about around 50.5 to this point in time and has settled in there. If USC wants to win this game, they have to try to make this into a shootout. And then by proxy, that's going to get Penn State's offense sped up a little bit more, but they can do it. Whereas last year they couldn't do it. This year they can. So I like a lot of points in this game, Max.
Yeah, I would say Penn State 28-21 was what I said on our previous show. I think it's going to be a fun game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any means. It could turn into a blowout, though. There is an avenue for Penn State to blow this team out of the water. But I think the cross-country road trip. Also, the thing that we say all the time, like, oh, the USC offensive line has been terrible, and specifically, you look at that Michigan game. Michigan dominated that offensive line, like absolutely dominated. But Miller Moss still almost won that game because that kid is special. That kid is a really, really good quarterback. I think he's one of the 10 best in the country easily right now. So that's the difference too. Is that yes, you have an offensive line that's doing him no favors right now, and yes, that receiving core, especially in that Minnesota game, I even thought the offensive line was bad. The receiving core was worse in that Minnesota game. They could not get open for him, which is, I think, another big reason why they lost. So you're starting to see it's a lot like the Drew Allar thing last year. It's like, oh, dude, Miller's just getting let down by his guys out there right now. But you look at it right now, I think Miller Moss is still a guy that scares me as a Penn State fan, right? He scares me as a guy that I think could win this game, put the team on his back and win this game, because I really do think he's a special quarterback. So he almost did it against Michigan. He was getting hit every single play, I feel like, and he was putting up dimes out there against them. And I think Penn State's secondary, while good, is not an elite unit right now. So I think USC could win this game off of Miller Moss. I don't think they will, though. I think Penn State's defensive line is going to dominate. I think the balanced offense they have with Nick Singleton and Drew Allar and all that, and Andy Klinick drawing it up, they're gonna win that battle against USC's defense as well. So yeah, I got Penn State winning 28-21, but I would not be surprised if this is a close game, or even if USC pulls off the upset.
Okay, and that's kind of the same thing that I've had. I don't see this getting away from a touchdown margin. I do see. I totally understand the blowout angle of it, because Penn State can impose its will and run the football with two very talented running backs. And at least latest intel, Max, just to confirm with you, Nicholas Singleton does project to play. He's been back at practice, and it was kind of more of a precautionary thing against UCLA. I'm interested to know your thoughts. You mentioned that the secondary, I guess, would be not necessarily the weakest link of the defense, but something that shouldn't be, I guess, looked at as a pure strength. I think they have a lot of depth. A.J. Harris has given them a #1 cornerback, and I'm interested to see that matchup between him and Jacoby Lane. But I do worry about, and I haven't even mentioned Deuce Robinson on this episode yet, I do worry about the mismatch that Robinson could create if Miller Moss has just enough time, or a Zachariah Branch, because I look at a Cam Miller versus a Zachariah Branch who's going to project as that slot corner, and with KJ Winston being out. So how has the secondary, that's kind of a two-part thing there. What does PFF say about the fact that KJ Winston's been missing? How's the secondary adapted and the defense adapted? Have they just kind of benefited from some weaker competition? Or is that something that could be exposed here with Winston not on the football field against a USC offense that can and should see better days down the road if they start to get it figured out on the offensive line?
Yeah, I think the only avenue for USC to have success against Penn State defensively is if they just are able to attack the secondary. And when I say the secondary is not the best part of this team or best part of this defense, it's still very good, right? Penn State's still 35th. They're still 35th in coverage grade this year. But the thing is, like, you look at the defense outside of that, I mean, they are top 10 in run defense and top 10 in pass rush grades this year. So you're talking about, like, those are two elite units of run D and pass rush. Secondary, the coverage grade is good. It's above average, right? So, but I think above average against Miller Moss and against those weapons and against Lincoln Riley drawing it up too, if Penn State doesn't get home with their pass rush, that could be an issue, right? Like you said, A.J. Harris has been excellent this year, but you lose KJ Winston, who is, by all accounts, one of the best players in college football, not just one of the best safeties, one of the best players in college football. That's a big loss for them right now. And I think they have done a pretty good job outside of him. But now you're going up against a really, really dangerous passing game with Miller Moss and those receivers. If Penn State's defensive line does not get home, then I think you can start to see some issues if Miller Moss has time back there to find the receivers downfield, because he will do that. He is a guy that he is very capable of reading the entire field. He's a very, very smart quarterback. He's a brilliant quarterback, honestly. I was able to interview him a couple weeks ago. Really, really good kid and really smart kid, you could tell. So if you give him time, he will dissect Penn State's secondary. But I think the difference is they won't give him time. I think he's going to be forced to get rid of the ball at lightning speed in this game. But yeah, I think if they do that, that's the avenue, I think, for USC to win this game, is if Miller Moss and those receivers have time back there to get open and him to find them.
Let's look at it at the offensive side of things, because we've raved about how much better the offense is for Penn State. And it's kind of like the defense for USC. It was ugly last year, and it's not perfect, but it's definitely a major step in the right direction, aside from you can still see some parts lingering from a season ago. To an extent, Penn State, too, there's the slow starts for the offense. And I think throughout the game, I still think there's kind of a rhythm element to it. It's not, hey, look, Drew Allar is in his second season of starting, but it's back-to-back new offenses for still a relatively young football player. He's just 20 years old, and he isn't through his second full season of starting. So I'm not surprised that the offense periodically will have miscommunications and timing issues, but they're still putting up 30-plus points around. UCLA held them under 30, but the way the game script kind of took that didn't allow for Penn State to push the 30 mark. But all those other games, they started out slow, whether it was a Kent State or a West Virginia, and then eventually they turned things on. And I still think the offense can even find better rhythm, especially not after this USC game, but after the bye week, going into the Wisconsin game. I think that's when the offense will really turn the corner here. What do you like about the offense aside from, hey, Drew Allar is performing very well? He's one of the best quarterbacks now in the entire country when it comes to college football. What other aspects of this offense, aside from the obvious ones of Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, are helping out Drew Allar in the supporting cast?
Yeah, I think it's just all comes back to Cold Nicky and how well he's drawing it up and how much he's making it easy for Allar to just understand it out there, right? It's no longer a complicated offense for a young kid to handle. It's no longer one that just isn't effective either. Now you have an offense that Drew Allar is comfortable in, and you're seeing everyone be reaping the benefits of that, right? So Allar's been great. The receiving core has been really, really a lot better, and I think that's a lot to do with Cold Nicky. Cold Nicky, Kansas was third in receiving grade last year, I believe, behind Oregon and Washington, who had superstars at receiver. And I like Kansas' receiving core, but Kansas did not have a superstar in that receiving core, right? And yet they're still third in the country in receiving grade. That's because Cold Nicky did such an amazing job of drawing it up for them to get open and make big plays for them. That's what he's doing for Penn State too, right? I don't think that you could say that there's a true, this guy's a top 10 wide receiver in the country. Tyler Warren is a top 3 or 4 tight end in the country, but outside of that, there's not a true superstar in that receiving core. But Cold Nicky's doing an excellent job of just drawing it up for them and making them play at a higher level than they were last year, honestly, right? So the receiving core is at a top 10 grade in the country right now. I believe they're 9th in receiving grade right now. The rushing attack, obviously, of Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Singleton, also like Allar, Singleton looks a lot better than last year, right? There's times last year where he looked a little slow out there. He had some fumble issues. He didn't trust his vision at times. Now you're seeing the explosiveness from him and why he was a 5-star recruit a few years ago. Now you're seeing why, because now he's one cut and go. He's getting downfield quickly. You're starting to see why he is the top running back, not Katron Allen. Whereas last year, I would say Katron Allen was a better running back out of the two of them because of Singleton's issues. Yeah, it was definitely. But now you're starting to say, okay, now it's a Singleton's team. And Katron Allen's a great complementary back. But Singleton is the lead guy for sure. I would say the offensive line has still been okay. They're like 50th in pass blocking grade this year. And they're down there in run blocking grade as well. They're not necessarily the best in run blocking either. So I would say the offensive line has still been okay, but they're overcoming it, right? They're 46th in run blocking grade. I believe they're 50th in pass blocking grade. So average, right? They haven't been great. They haven't been bad either. But what's different now is that you have a quarterback who's very comfortable. You have a star running back who's very comfortable. And you have a receiving core who's playing way above what they were doing last year. That's the difference right now. So, yeah, I've been blown away by it. I've been so impressed by Eddie Cold Nicky. And honestly, we could be talking about a Broyles Award for Eddie Cold Nicky at the end of the year, the way he's going right now. He is, in my opinion, he's been one of the best assistant coaches in college football. And unfortunately for Penn State fans, the way he's coordinating that offense right now, he might not be an assistant coach much longer, right? This might be a head coach in college football next year. So, I think he is certainly one of the leading candidates for the Broyles Award right now, which is given to the best assistant in college football. And he's done an amazing job with this offense.
I Don't like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pointed it out for the sake of the conversation, but I don't like that because yes, I think Andy Kotelnicki is going to be out of Happy Valley sooner rather than later, and for good reasons for him, bad reasons for Penn State. But for the sake of the matchup, that's all good news. And like I said, I think better days are still ahead for the offense as a whole because it's still a new system. They're still getting acclimated, and that second bye week here after USC will kind of help allow them to turn the corner even more, and they'll look like more of a well-oiled machine. So even the things that are holding them back, they'll start to break through that and be more efficient, more explosive, I think, ahead. And that's going into an important game against Ohio State down the road. But USC, still a very formidable opponent. That's at the Coliseum. This is going to be a good game. This is going to be an exciting game. And you've said a lot of positive things about Miller Moss. I think I've been underselling him to this point. So I want to know a little bit more about this USC offense that I'm missing, Max, and we'll talk about that on the other side of this break. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 per month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rates may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Today's episode is brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Hey, football fans, fall is here, and that means we are in the heart of the college football season. And to make sure you're ready, we partner with Home Field, the exclusive apparel sponsor of our show, to bring you the Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign. Home Field is the go-to for premium collegiate apparel, crafted with comfort in mind, featuring vintage designs that is going to make you the envy of any tailgate. I've got some Home Field apparel for myself this season. With over 180 schools to choose from, including Penn State, there's something for each and every fan. The real MVP, though, is the Home Field Platinum Football Box. This is your all-access pass to exclusive gear for the 2024 season with 3 never-before-seen items from your school. Plus, VIPs get even more. You'll get a special hat and a 2024 Platinum Pass for early access and discounts all season long. So don't wait. Head over to homefieldapparel.com and gear up today and use our promo code WEARE24. That is WEARE24 for 15% off at checkout. That's over at homefieldapparel.com. Let's make this season unforgettable. So you've had a lot of positive intel about Miller Moss, and I've at least been skeptical of it. I don't think that Miller Moss isn't talented or doesn't prepare any less than anybody else. I think he's one of the most well-prepared, skilled when it comes to understanding the X's and O's, like a Drew Allar. I'm never going to look at anybody and say that no, there are very few quarterbacks that study the game better than Drew Allar and Miller Moss in this case, from what I've seen. But I also think, okay, and it's easy to make this comparison, I guess, when he's the former number 1 overall pick to the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams just had that star power ability that Miller Moss does not have, in my opinion. And maybe you think otherwise, but Caleb Williams is just able to do, I mean, it's why he was the number 1 overall pick. Miller Moss isn't able to extend drives by himself, extend plays even, maybe a little bit, but not to the extent of Caleb Williams. And I think USC is missing that. And that's why these offensive line problems are now kind of combining together, because Caleb Williams was able to ad-lib and make the USC offense continue to go. Miller Moss can't do that. So while I think he can be and I think he does have an NFL future, I think he's a good quarterback, he's missing an element that is so much needed in this USC offense right now.
Yeah, listen, it's not like if you look at Lincoln Riley's quarterbacks in the past, like he's certainly not one of the best ones, but that's not saying a lot when you got Baker Mayfield, Heisman winner, number 1 overall pick, still a star quarterback in the NFL right now. Kyler Murray, Heisman winner, number 1 overall pick, star quarterback in the NFL. Jalen Hurts, Heisman runner-up, 2nd-round pick, starting in the NFL right now. Spencer Rattler had a really good year.
Getting ready to start.
Literally starting this week for the New Orleans Saints,
yeah.
Right? Caleb Williams, Heisman winner, number 1 overall pick, starting for the Chicago Bears right now. Like, You look at all of them, literally every single one of his quarterbacks is currently a starting quarterback in the NFL, which is nuts. Miller Moss probably won't be that. I think Miller Moss is more like a second to third round pick. What I think Miller Moss is so good at, though, is that last year, and USC had offensive issues last year, and a lot of it, I would say, were on Caleb Williams, because Caleb Williams, like you said, ad-libbed. He ad-libs a lot. He does not run the offense that Lincoln Riley wants. He is going to go out there and do what he wants. I love Caleb Williams. I would take him number one overall, no question. I think Caleb Williams is one of the best quarterback prospects I've ever seen. What his downside is, though, he played a lot of hero ball last year. And to his credit, it was because the defense was so bad. He knew, if I don't put up 50 points in this game, we're not going to win. So I think Miller is a different quarterback in that, hey, I'm going to run the Lincoln Riley offense. I'm going to run it the way it was designed. I'm not saying he's better than Caleb Williams. I don't think he's close to being better than Caleb Williams. I would agree with you.
Right.
But I think Miller is a different quarterback than Lincoln's had in the past. And I don't think he's going to be a top 5 pick in the draft like the almost every other single one of them have been, or a Heisman winner like almost any other one have been. But he's just such a smart kid, and I love Miller Moss. So when I interviewed him, I mean, he just was such a good dude, and he knew what his role was. And I think my favorite answer he gave me when I asked him, I was like, hey, what's your favorite play of your career? Like, was it that whole shot against LSU that won you the game? Like, was it this throw? Was it that? He's like, no, actually, my favorite play of my career was a 2nd and 10 in the bowl game against Louisville. They sent a blitz at me, and instead of taking a sack, I threw an incompletion. I threw it away. And that's his favorite play of his career, was an incomplete pass he threw out of bounds, because he's like, if I took that sack there, it would have been 3rd and 17. We would not have been able to get off the field, and we would have gotten off the field. We would have had to punt. And then he's like, but instead it was 3rd and 10. I completed a pass after that, and we scored a big touchdown on that drive, which ended up being like the game deciding touchdown that we ended up just blowing him out of the water after that touchdown. So he's like, if I took that sack there, we probably would have been in a close game the entire game, but I didn't. And instead I threw an incomplete pass, and then we were able to score a touchdown later on that drive. That's just, a maturity beyond his years is what I think Miller Moss has. And I think you see that right now. And I do think the USC offensive line has become a lot worse than it was for Caleb Williams, because once again, Caleb Williams, even though he's amazing at everything, the one thing I would say is he's a very hard quarterback to block for, because he's a guy who's going to dance around back there, make his offensive lives hell, honestly, out back there as well. And it's tough to block for him because of how long he holds on the football and how much he breaks pockets and all that. Miller Moss does not do that, but the difference is the offensive line now is a lot worse than it was for Caleb Williams, and you're seeing why they have some offensive issues. So, again, I have none of the offensive problems USC has is on Miller Moss. None of them. I think he's a top 10 quarterback in the country. I think the offensive line is terrible right now. The receiving core has not impressed me too much. This should have been a receiving core we'd have been like, oh, we're really scared of. Zachariah Branch has been okay this year. Deuce Robinson's been okay this year. It's been fine, right? It's not been like a great receiving core either. And then even like Lincoln Riley's play calling, I've been a little disappointed by sometimes too, which I never thought I would say either. So I don't think any of the issues are in Miller Moss. I think he's a stud quarterback. I agree with you. He's not a superstar like Caleb Williams or Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield or even Jalen Hurts or Spencer Rattler or anyone. Or he probably is as good as Spencer Rattler, honestly. I think he's going to be a guy that's a 2nd or 3rd round pick, going to stay around a long time in the NFL as a backup. And I think he's a really, really smart guy. He's just going to run the offense the way it's designed.
Good. I'm glad I made that take, because I have been saying that Miller Moss does have a future in the NFL, and he is PFF's highest graded player for this USC team overall and on the offense, of course. Woody Marks is now there. Quentin Joyner's listed there, but in terms of overall starters and guys that are playing consistently, Woody Marks is that 2nd overall player, and Woody Marks is a very good running back. He had over 100 yards against a Michigan run defense, and that was a game where they were playing from behind, and you wouldn't think, well, they're going to take their running back pretty much out of the game plan and try to open up the passing attack. No, Woody Marks allowed them to stay in it and broke off a couple of runs. But that's what I'm curious about. The fact that you mentioned that this wide receiver core is just underwhelming to this point. I think it's the best one that Penn State is going to play to this point, and Ohio State's is obviously on a different level here. But you would think that USC would at least not be too far behind because of the options that they have. It's not just compromised to, a Jeremiah Smith and a Emeka Egbuka, right, for Ohio State. It's Zachariah Branch, it's Deuce Robinson, it's Jacoby Lane, it's Mekhi Lemon, it's I'm blanking on one of the other, Kyron Hudson. Kyron Hudson as well. That's 5 wide receivers that can be 1s and 2s in other offenses, and they're just like you said, they're okay. Is it really the offensive line?
It's a lot to do with that. I think I do. I think it's the fact that they have 2 seconds to run their routes right before that ball's coming out of Miller Moss's hands.
They can't get open.
Exactly. That's a problem. So I think it has part to do with it. I also think that they just had their own issues this year with drops and stuff like that too. I've watched Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson. I haven't been blown away by them this year. And these are two guys that I thought were going to be studs. Like I thought they were going to enter this year, have a sophomore breakout, and then we're all talking about both of them as like first round picks in next year's draft. We're not doing that right now. I think they're both on pace for like 500 yards total this year, right? So I just think they've been a little disappointing. I think the offensive line has definitely a lot to do with it because the offensive line, I think, is by far the weakness of this team right now. But I think that they also have not done too much to help out Miller Moss either. They've been good. I'm not saying they have not been good. This is still not a receiving corps to keep an eye on for Penn State. I do think, like I said before, this is the way for USC to beat Penn State is with Miller Moss and those receivers. But they have not been blowing me away like I thought they had a chance to entering the year. So, I think the receiving corps has been good, not great. I think the offensive line has been really bad. That's what's killing Miller Moss right now. And Miller Moss is still playing really, really good football, even with that. So, I think that's probably how I would describe the USC offense right now.
And let's quickly flip it back to the USC defense, which we've talked about. D'Anton Lynn, a former Penn State guy. He coached a very good UCLA defense, top 10 overall. I think they were, Penn State and them were 1 and 2 in terms of yards per rush allowed, per rush attempt. I thought that UCLA, of all teams, that's, kind of middle of the pack overall as a group. And they have an elite defense. Lynn goes over to USC. He's obviously improved them. But they're going to be missing key guys, or guys are going to be banged up for them as well, like an Eric Gentry. Eric Gentry is their best overall run defender per PFF, and he's not going to be available for this game, it looks like. And then they had some injuries where they were up by 10 points against Minnesota, then some bumps and bruises came throughout the game, and then that's when Minnesota took over and mounted this comeback against USC at home. So the depth defensively is probably USC's biggest concern, because it's certainly not a coaching problem. Like Penn State, they've added a lot of size. Like the players are just bigger. They put on the weight, but the results aren't there because I think just by natural attrition, they can't play a full 4 quarters of games. And then you have guys like Bear Alexander opting out in the middle of the season, which were because he's not a fan of being a backup, but he was a huge depth piece for them on the defensive line.
Yeah, I think, again, like I said before, the issue with this defense is still up front. You look at their grades right now, especially they're 91st in run defense grade and they're 93rd in pass rushing grade, right? So still not good. It's still not good enough. It's one of the 40 worst or so in college football. But they have been a lot better in the coverage unit, which is why I think that this defense has still been a little bit better. They're 49th in coverage grade right now, right? So, and that's still like 49th in coverage grade doesn't sound great, but you got to remember, like, if you're not getting a pass rush going, and those quarterbacks are standing back there for a long time, it's hard to play really good in coverage for a long time, and yet they're still doing it at a pretty good level. So their secondary is their best part of the team, I think. It's still been okay. It's not been great either, but I think the issue is up front. With Eric Gentry out, that's another big loss too, with Nick Singleton potentially having a really, really big day, which I think he could in this one. That's an issue for USC in this right now. So the front seven has not been great. Again, like I said, they're outside of the top 90 in run defense and pass rush grade. So I think the secondary has been a lot better, but I think the front seven has still been leave a lot to be desired right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is why that coaches say the battle is won in the trenches. Truly, you are seeing it happen with USC here, and Penn State wins both of those categories right now, both offensively and defensively at the line of scrimmage. He is Max Chadwick of Pro Football Focus. You can check out his work. Links will be down in the description. He is the co-host of PFF's College Football Show. Max, thanks so much for the time, the insight, the analysis. And it's looking like, again, it'll be an exciting game, but I'm looking forward to it regardless. And hopefully Penn State can kind of shake off that 10-2 moniker and pick up a signature victory here in the middle of the season.
Appreciate you, Zach.